Joker is an excellent comic book inspired film that is much more poignant in the way it deals with mental illness and how those people are generally kind of shunned or pushed aside in society, and it is totally worth watching. Joker stars Joaquin Phoenix with a brief cameo or supporting role by Rob De Niro and a couple of the actors that pop up in the film. Um, I must first preface this by saying that the film is more poignant to me because the illness that Phoenix's character Arthur Fleck has in the film, where he has uncontrollable fits of laughter in response to emotional situations, because I actually know someone that has a similar illness, and it does affect their ability to form relationships with people because you would just be having a conversation with them and they start laughing and it would be uncontrollable and not match what the conversation was. So that aspect of the film in terms of how they look at mental illness and how it affects people's lives was more poignant to me, and it made for it a better film. It is certainly inspired by comic books because it is kind of a possible origin story for Joker, for Batman's arch enemy, the Joker. And it really takes some creative freedoms or liberties in terms of how it portrays this because it is not really a superhero movie. It's more or less kind of a taxi driver esque look at a superhero film, and that they take someone who has mental illness, is basically just an outcast of society, and specifically a society of the early 80s in New York or Gotham, where there is like a class or a caste system, and people who are on the lower rungs of it, the poor people, the people in poverty, they're kind of just cast aside and left to fend for themselves. There's not a lot of jobs that are out there. They're basically just the elitists, the super rich that go around to fancy parties, operas, and things, while the subservient people or anyone who's not part of that class is just left to live in squalor of really crappy shanty apartments or slumlord style apartments and things like that. And the movie kind of hits home if you know someone that has a similar mental illness or an ability to pull away from society that doesn't really fit into society in the perfect way as a lot of films portray. Specifically in these comic book films and superhero films, everything is always giddy, happy-go-lucky. You know that you're going to have a happy ending by the end of the film no matter what comes before it. And in this film, you don't get that. You get a really pretty hardcore look at society and how people are just kind of left behind to flounder on their own. And I think it made for a good movie. Of course, Joaquin Phoenix is the star of this film. It's entirely about him, and it follows several recent films that he's made where he deals with people who are obviously going through some form of mental illness or PTSD. And in this case, you learn that possibly Arthur experienced some abuse at the hands of his mother's boyfriend, chained to a radiator, and maybe that contributed to some of his illnesses and things that he has. But it's a very good film. It opens with him being kind of this floundering party clown or stand-up comic, and he's living with his mother, who he helps to take care of. You can obviously tell she's older in life. She seems to be kind of having some mental degradation at this point in time, but she still loves her son. In fact, she's constantly telling him that she's writing to Thomas Wayne and that if he reads her letters, then he'll help them out because he's a good man. And a lot of the film deals with things that are going on in Arthur's head, and you don't necessarily know if everything that you're seeing is a truthful or accurate representation of what's occurring. Specifically, there's a relationship that you see starting to form between Arthur and kind of a floor mate, a woman and her child that lives down the hall. Arthur sees himself as having this relationship or budding relationship with her, and you find out later in the film that it didn't really exist, that they've just had more of an acquaintance style relationship where they've passed each other a few times in the hallway or the elevators. But so Arthur, he's trying to be a clown, a party clown. He goes out, gets a gun from one of his friends that he works with so he can protect himself after he gets beat up by some kids in the opening few minutes of the film, where they still his sign that he's spinning saying going out of business, closing, sale, everything's got to go. And they beat him with it and they beat him up. And then he has multiple scenes where he speaks to kind of a counselor that you find out later has to cut him, a counselor from social services that you find out later because cuts to the city's budget. They're no longer going to offer these social services for people. And that possibly contributes to Arthur going off his medication and, in essence, creating this world in his head where things are occurring as he wants them to, not necessarily how they actually do. The film caught a lot of flack for its representation of incel characters or things like that, and I think that was totally overblown, because what it is it's a film about someone who's broken and a system that's broken that keeps basically shitting on them, and how they cope with it, and what those coping mechanisms do, and then how they end up not being able to achieve or excel in this society when everything seems to be against them, both in reality and in their own fractured mind. And Phoenix gives a Oscar-worthy performance, in my opinion, in this film. And you can tell there's a bit of an Oedipus complex with his mother, in terms of how she treats him. She really kind of codified him and babied him, possibly after these issues of being abused by a former boyfriend. Well, but Arthur's character continues on. He gets the gun, he goes to a children's hospital, and is really bonding with these children until the gun, when he kind of falls out of his pocket, and then he gets fired from his job for carrying a gun to it. And you can see that really kind of helps attribute to the downward spiral. And then he's on the train, and he sees some rich businessman type that basically are sitting there sexually harassing a woman on the train. And then Arthur then has another one of his laughing fits where he can't really cope with what's going on, so he just starts laughing. These three drunk guys, they walk up to him, and they start slapping him around a little bit, knock him on the floor, start kicking him, and things like that. And then Arthur pulls out the gun, pop, pop, shoots two of them in absolute self-defense. He shoots a third one as he's running away. And then he proceeds to chase that third one down, where he puts several more bullets in him, killing three people. And this starts to create this kind of groundswell of support in terms of the lower class or the disenfranchised kind of speaking out against it, because you have Thomas Wayne come on the TV and say that these boys didn't deserve to die. They were good men, and they were gunned down like dogs in the gutter. And in reality, they weren't good people. They were people that were abusing a woman first off, and then actually assaulting a man for no reason other than the fact he was laughing. So, they kind of in essence deserved what they got. At least for the first two. The third one, he was a coward that took off running as soon as his friends were shot. But did he necessarily deserve to be gunned down like that? Nah, not really. But you can still see that his actions led to his own demise in this instance. So where there is the groundswell of support, some cops try to come around and talk to Arthur a couple times to see if he may or may not have been involved with this. And Arthur kind of dodges him around. And his mother, of course, is writing more and more letters to Thomas Wayne. And finally, she's like, mail that last letter to Thomas. Make sure you mail it to him. And Arthur finally looks at it. He reads the letter, and it may be true or not true that in the letter she says that Arthur is Thomas Wayne's son, and that, you fathered him, so now you have to help take care of him, you have to take care of us. And then Arthur goes to Wayne Manor, sees Bruce, talks to him for a little bit, does like this with his face and makes him smile. And then Alfred comes up and kind of pushes Arthur back through the gate. And then he realizes who he is. And there's kind of a look of recognition on Alfred's face, of who he is. And it's one of those situations where it's not a clear answer given in terms of if he is actually Bruce Wayne's half-brother, Thomas Wayne's son, or is his mother just crazy? Because that's what Arthur tells him, is that your mother's just crazy. You were adopted. She adopted you. And, she had all this mental illness. But there seems to be a look of recognition on Alfred's face, along with the young Bruce Wayne in the film actually looking a lot like Joaquin Phoenix in the film as well. So there possibly is a familiar connection there. So Arthur then starts to dig around a little bit and goes to Arkham Asylum, where he locates his mother's medical records. And there's a scene where the guy won't give them to him because he looks at it. The orderly looks at it and realizes that, this is the kid's mother, and I can't give it to you. And Arthur takes it and runs off down the hallway, going to a stairwell. And again, it kind of blurs the line whether this is actually happening or if it's just happening in Arthur's mind. There's not really an explicitly stated answer to this, but he reads in the file that his mother was mentally ill. She was put into Arkham for a little while, and that she did adopt a child, and that the child was abused, and that she didn't let she allowed the abuse to happen. She didn't stop the boyfriend from harming the child. But it raises a lot of questions, because the Waynes do, of course, have a lot of money, so they could pay to forge some adoption papers. And one would think, an unwed mother adopting a child as she has a history of mental illness doesn't seem like something that would necessarily happen in terms of, adoption services allowing a child to go into what has all of the red flags of a broken home waiting to happen. So it is entirely possible, or at least plausible from that answer aspect, that his mother Penny is telling the truth, and that the Waynes used their money to kind of clamp down on it, because Arthur's mom was just a secretary, and Thomas Wayne is, of course, the heir to the Wayne Manor, Wayne fortune, things like that. So Arthur then has a moment where he goes and confronts his mother in the hospital. She's done had another kind of a stroke or something like that, and he basically just smothers her with a pillow. And it's a sad scene, because it's he is smothering her because he feels betrayed by her. She's lied to him his entire life. He was adopted. All of his problems are now projected onto his mother for causing those problems, whether or not she may have actually had, because it could all just be bullshit that the Waynes forged. So Arthur smothers his mother, and then he leaves and goes out to his house, where at this point you can see his full-on transition into Joker, so to speak. He's putting on his makeup and things like that, because he received a phone call from the show, or the comedy kind of late night show that Robert De Niro hosts, because Robert De Niro earlier in the film played a clip of one of his attempts at stand-up, where basically Arthur just gets on stage, freezes, and starts laughing to himself the entire time, so he can't even complete his routine. And Arthur agrees to come on to the show, and that's what he's prepping for. He's painting his face up like the old Cesar A. Romero Joker, and he's getting ready to go to the show. At that point, two of his co-workers show up, the co-worker that gave him the gun, along with the little person that worked with him as well. And they're there, and the guy who gave him the gun is like, well, what did you tell the cops? I need to know what you tell the cops, because they're going to ask me. They're going to ask me. And then Arthur just loses it, and he stabs the guy a couple times, killing him. And then he lets the little person go. He understands. And he says to him, and it's kind of a poignant scene, where he opens a door for him, and he says, "You're free to go." He's like, "I won't hurt you." He's like, "You were the only one that was ever nice to me." And the guy goes off. And just before that, before they show up, Arthur's looking at a photograph, and it's of his mother, from years before when she was younger. And on the back of it is signed, "I do love your smile, T.W. Thomas Wayne," in essence. And Arthur crinkles it up in his hand like he's raging on it. And it could be in that instance that he realizes that he wrongly held his mother, or blamed her for all of his problems in killing her. He really did a disservice to himself, because she was maybe telling the truth. And that at that point, he's completely lost to this darker elements of his personality. He's completely fractured and created two separate personalities, the one of the Joker, the one of Arthur Fleck. And he's just going down this path of absolute anarchy and destruction that, in essence, is creating the character of the Joker. So he goes on to the Murray Show, which is Robert De Niro's character, and he's on there, and they're kind of laughing back and forth at him, because he is being awfully weird there. He's making a couple weird movements. He kisses the other older female guest that's on there, kind of drawing, laughs or murmurs from the crowd. And then he gets in kind of a rage fight with Murray, starts yelling back and forth at him, because he starts telling very morbid jokes and things like that. And, Murray doesn't want him to do that, until he then pulls out a gun and shoots Robert De Niro's character in the face right on live TV. And from there, it's really just kind of batshit crazy at this point, because he goes into the camera and kind of talks to it for a little bit before the police finally arrest him, and they're taking him down to the police station in the car. And he's just sitting there looking out as the city seems to be burning, because all of the clown people who Arthur kind of inspired with the original subway murders of the three businessmen, have then at this point created a riot and a rising up against the elitists, or the higher class of people there. And then an ambulance hits them, killing the two police officers in the car, and then the clowns that are dressed drag Joker out, throw him on top of the car, and basically are chanting for him to come back to life. And this is, I believe, intercut with a series of shots where somebody comes up to Thomas Wayne and his wife and Bruce outside of a play or an opera house, and then they shoot Thomas Wayne and his wife, steal her pearl necklaces. They don't really dwell on it. It's kind of a passing or fleeting set of shots, as the focus of this film is absolutely on Joaquin Phoenix, him and his broken mind at this time. And this sequence kind of ends with Joaquin on top of the police car dancing as the crowds yell and burn around them. And then it cuts to a scene where he is in this mental hospital, and he's talking to a social worker. and then he starts laughing to himself, and he's like, "That's a hell of a joke." And again, it really kind of muddles the waters to whether anything that we actually saw before, if that was realistic or not, or maybe author was just telling this story as kind of a prelude or a parallel to the murder of Thomas Wayne, and maybe what caused somebody to kill him was this massive uprising of people that may or may not have ever happened. Again, it's not really explicitly stated, and that's part of the beauty of the film, is it doesn't give a definitive answer on anything. It's left open to multiple interpretations to allow you to kind of pull or pick what you want to believe from it, because it is, at least it is pitched originally to be like a standalone film, not necessarily a continuation of a comic book film. It doesn't have the cheesy superheroes thrown into it. Batman's not even in it. Thomas Wayne is in it, but that's really the only parallel and correlation, along with the little Bruce and Alfred. But, the film ends at that point. He walks out of the room with the social worker and begins to kind of dance his way down the hallway, and you can see some bloody footprints left and a possibility that maybe he killed the social worker. And you don't know if this is just an additional person that he's killed, or maybe this is the only person he's killed, or maybe he smothered his mother and that's what got him into the mental institution. But it really works because it doesn't give you any answers that you're actually seeking, and it doesn't tell you anything that could not be false, because it does play it in kind of a way of blending the stories together to kind of leave it open to that interpretation for you. Like I said, I really liked the film, especially in the way how it kind of looked at mental illness, specifically like this inability for people to emote properly or under the correct circumstances. Author not being able to function because he would just laugh randomly at things. And it was really poignant to me because of that. Like I said, because I know somebody that's like that, it really hits it home. And I think it's a better movie because of that, because it seems that Todd Phillips from The Hangover actually did a really good job in this one. And I was surprisingly, I was very surprised at his ability in terms of a more dramatic or a more serious take on direction. And I think he did a good job. He also co-wrote the script, and the cinematography is excellent, along with the costumes, set design, things like that, along with the use of popular music and stuff like that. It really blends the film well together. It's a dark, bleak film that doesn't really have any hopeful light to it, and that may be some of the reason why it caught some flack from some critics and stuff. But I just think they overlooked a lot of the important aspects of how mental illness is just cast aside. And it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, they both do it equally. They don't really want to deal with the mentally ill because they look at them as like dregs of society. And it's almost a completely apolitical film that just casts, the rich, which any politician that's been in the game very long is going to be wealthy. And most of the time, that's not independent wealthy. That's wealthy from their position as a politician, and it's just absurd. But I would absolutely recommend this film. It is dark. Don't go into it thinking it's going to have a happy ending, because it doesn't. It leaves you with a lot of questions at the end of it. But it is a very good film, and I would love to see Joaquin Phoenix finally win that elusive Oscar statuette for this film, because it is well deserved by him and possibly a number of other Oscars, because the film was nominated for 11 of them in total. Other than that, thank you. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share, and have a good day.